Hey, what is up, everyone? Today we got a pretty unique story. It's narrated by Frederick Surrey. Get cozy and watch till the end, guys.
There exists, across the countless battlefields of the 41st millennium, a phenomenon that defies all logic and expectation. Something that contradicts the very nature of the most violent species the galaxy has ever known. In the endless expanse of war-torn worlds, where the thunder of guns never truly falls silent, and the screams of the dying are drowned out by the roar of engines, there are moments when even the most fearless warriors pause. When even those bred for nothing but violence and conquest feel the cold touch of genuine terror. The greenskins, those towering brutes of muscle and malice known as the Orks, live for battle. They are creatures born from spores, engineered by ancient gods in an age before memory, designed for one singular purpose: to fight, to kill, and to revel in the chaos of war. Yet there are encounters on the battlefield, rare but unforgettable, when these green-skinned terrors encounter something that makes them hesitate, something that reaches past their genetically hardwired love of violence and touches a primal fear buried deep within their psyche. That something walks on two legs. It stands taller than any orc, wrapped in ceramite and adamantium, bearing weapons that speak with the voice of annihilation. Within its armored shell lies not a living warrior, but the remnant of one, a consciousness preserved beyond death, rage given form and purpose. The Imperium calls these war machines Dreadnoughts. The Orks, in their crude tongue, have other names for them, names spoken with an uncharacteristic hesitation. Names that carry weight even among creatures who know no true fear of death. This is the story of why certain dreadnoughts inspire genuine terror in the hearts of the galaxy's most fearless species. It is a tale woven from the threads of psychology, ancient technology, legendary warriors, and the strange spiritual beliefs that govern Ork society. To understand why these walking tombs cause the green tide to falter, we must first understand the minds of the Orks themselves, and then explore what makes these particular war machines so uniquely terrifying to creatures who should, by all logic, love nothing more than fighting them. The answer lies not in simple firepower or armor thickness, though both play their part. It dwells instead in something deeper, something that touches the very soul of what it means to be an Ork, and reveals the terrible contradiction at the heart of their existence. Understanding the greenskin mind. To comprehend what frightens an Ork, you must first understand what an Ork truly is. These are not simply large, violent creatures with green skin and a love of warfare. They are, in fact, one of the most successful species in the entire galaxy, outnumbering perhaps every other intelligent starfaring race, save possibly the Tyranids. Their success stems not from advanced technology or sophisticated strategy, but from the sheer perfection of their design. The Orks were created millennia ago by beings known as the Old Ones, ancient entities of immense power who fought a terrible war against the Necrons and the forces of chaos during an age called the War in Heaven. The Old Ones crafted the Orks from an earlier, more sophisticated species called the Krork, massive warriors who stood nearly 12 meters tall and wore armor that would have been impressive even by the standards of the Imperium during the Horus Heresy. These Krork were intelligent, disciplined soldiers, weapons of precision and purpose. Over the countless millennia since their creation, the Krork devolved into the Orks. They lost much of their sophisticated technology, their discipline, their tactical nuance. Yet what they lost in refinement, they gained in pure, distilled efficiency. The Orks that plague the galaxy in the 41st millennium are perfectly adapted for their singular purpose: perpetual warfare. Every Ork possesses an instinctive understanding of mechanical principles. They can build guns and vehicles from scrap metal and spare parts, guided not by learned knowledge, but by genetic memory encoded into their very being. A mech boy, one of the specialist Orks dedicated to building things, understands engineering at an instinctive level, requiring almost no training to construct weapons and war machines that, by all logical analysis, should not function. Yet they do function, and function well, because of something unique to the orc species. The orcs possess a latent psychic ability that manifests not individually, but collectively. This gestalt psychic field, which grows stronger the more orcs gather together, has the power to subtly bend reality to conform to orc expectations. If an orc believes his gun will shoot, and enough of his fellows believe the same, then the gun will shoot, even if its construction is fundamentally unsound. If an orc paints his vehicle red because he believes red makes things go faster, and enough other orcs share this belief, then the vehicle actually will go faster. This is not unlimited power. The orcs cannot simply wish their enemies out of existence or believe themselves invulnerable and make it so. The gestalt field works within limitations, reinforcing existing things rather than creating something from nothing. It allows orc technology to function when it should not, lets their ramshackle vehicles hold together under stresses that should tear them apart, and gives them small advantages in combat that compound into significant battlefield effects. More importantly for our purposes, this gestalt psychic field also governs orc society and psychology. Orcs instinctively obey those larger than themselves. Size in orc culture equals authority. The bigger an orc grows, the more respect he commands, until eventually he becomes a war boss, a towering brute whose sheer physical presence demands obedience from all lesser orcs. This system functions with brutal simplicity, might makes right, and the mightiest orc is always in charge. Orcs grow larger through combat. The more an orc fights, the bigger he becomes, fed by some quality of violence itself that stimulates his fungal biology to ever greater heights of growth. The legendary beast, an orc war boss who nearly destroyed the Imperium during the War of the Beast, grew to stand as tall as an imperial knight war machine. Size and power create a self-reinforcing cycle in orc society, where those who fight the most become the strongest, and the strongest naturally lead more orcs into more fights. While the orc philosophy of life, what they call their culture, centers entirely around fighting. They believe in two gods, Gork and Mork, divine entities that embody different aspects of orc violence. Gork is brutally cunning, while Mork is cunningly brutal. The distinction matters deeply to orcs, who see in their gods the perfect expression of their own nature. These gods exist in the warp, created and sustained by the collective belief of the orc species, entities of psychic energy given form by the expectations and faith of billions upon billions of greenskins. Orcs do not fear death in the way other species do. They see death in battle as the ultimate fate, the best possible ending to a life well lived. When an orc dies fighting, he believes he goes to join Gork and Mork in an endless battle in the afterlife, where he can fight forever against ever stronger foes. This belief makes orcs almost impossible to break through conventional morale effects. You cannot frighten an orc with the threat of death, because death in battle is exactly what he wants. Yet orcs can feel fear, though it manifests differently than in other species. What frightens an orc is not danger itself, but rather things that violate his fundamental understanding of how the universe should work. Orcs respect strength, admire brutality, and honor those who display courage and ferocity in combat. They despise cowardice, hate weakness, and feel genuine unease around things that seem unnatural according to their worldview. This is why orcs actually prefer fighting living opponents over machines. Fighting machines lack something essential that orcs crave, and some visceral quality of living combat that mechanical opponents cannot provide. An orc might respect a tough vehicle for being hard, but he would much rather fight the warrior inside it. Machines do not bleed properly, do not scream properly, do not die properly. They lack the satisfaction that comes from defeating a living foe. Orcs also feel uncomfortable around things that their gestalt psychic field cannot easily classify or understand. The more orcs gather together, the stronger their collective belief becomes, and the more real their shared understanding of the universe becomes. When something contradicts that shared understanding, when something exists outside the comfortable categories of big and strong or small and weak, it creates a cognitive dissonance that manifests as unease, fear for an orc. It is not the terror of personal extinction. It is the horror of encountering something that should not be, something that violates the natural order as the orcs understand it. It is the crawling realization that the universe might be more complex and more terrible than their simple philosophy can accommodate. It is the moment when even an orc's limited imagination rebels against what his eyes show him, and certain dreadnoughts, those walking tombs of ancient warriors, trigger every single one of these deep psychological fears in ways that no other enemy can quite match. The walking tombs. What dreadnoughts are the Adeptus Astartes, humanity's space marines, are transhuman warriors created through genetic enhancement, surgical modification, and brutal training to serve as the Imperium's ultimate soldiers. These warriors are stronger, are faster, and more durable than any normal human could ever be, clad in power armor that amplifies their already superhuman abilities. Yet even space marines are not immortal. Even these gene-enhanced demigods can fall in battle, their bodies broken beyond the ability of even the most skilled apothecaries to repair. When a space marine suffers wounds that would kill a normal man 1,000 times over, when his body is shattered and his organs ruined beyond all hope of recovery, the chapter faces a choice. They can allow their brother to die with honor, his gene seed harvested to create new warriors who will carry on his legacy. Or, if the warrior in question has proven himself exceptional, if his service to the Emperor and his skill at war mark him as too valuable to lose, the chapter can offer him a different fate. And they can offer him internment within a dreadnought. The process is both a horror and an honor. The broken body of the fallen warrior is carefully removed from his ruined power armor, what little remains of his organic form preserved through technologies that blend the biological with the mechanical. The Space Marine's still living remains are placed within a sarcophagus, a sealed container filled with amniotic fluids and life support systems that will keep his organs functioning despite injuries that should have killed him 12 times over. This sarcophagus becomes his new body, or rather, it is integrated into a new body. The small container housing the Marine's remains is built into the core of a dreadnought chassis, a combat walker that stands 3 times the height of a man. Thick plates of ceramite and adamantium, at the same materials used to armor the Imperium's battle tanks, form its shell. Weapon mounts replace arms, bearing firepower that would normally require a vehicle to carry. Sensors and optics feed directly into the Marine's brain, allowing him to see and sense the world around him through mechanical eyes. The connection between pilot and machine is absolute and permanent. The Space Marine cannot leave his metal tomb. The neural interface that allows him to control the dreadnought body is wired directly into his brain, into his spine, into what little remains of his nervous system. He becomes one with the machine, his thoughts translating instantly into movement, his will directing weapons that can level buildings and shatter armor. The technology behind dreadnoughts dates back to the Dark Age of technology, that golden era of human advancement before Old Night fell and plunged humanity into millennia of ignorance and savagery. The art of creating new dreadnought chassis has been largely lost, with most chapters relying on ancient patterns that have been maintained and repaired for thousands of years. Each dreadnought is a relic, a priceless artifact that cannot be replaced if destroyed. The loss of a dreadnought is a tragedy not just for the warrior within, but for the irreplaceable technology that housed him. The most common pattern of dreadnought in the 41st millennium is the Castroferrum pattern, particularly the Mark V variant. These war machines stand approximately 3.5 meters tall, massive constructs that tower over even other space marines. Their design is blocky and brutal, all prioritizing armor protection and weapon stability over elegance. The sarcophagus housing the pilot sits in the center of the chassis, protected by layers of the strongest armor the Imperium can produce. A standard Castroferum pattern dreadnought typically carries a ranged weapon on one arm and a close combat weapon on the other, though many variations exist. The most iconic configuration pairs an assault cannon with a dreadnought power fist, creating a war machine equally deadly at range and in melee. The assault cannon is a fearsome weapon, a rotating multi-barreled gun that fires hundreds of mass-reactive rounds per minute, each shell exploding on impact with enough force to tear through armor plate. The power fist is exactly what it sounds like, a massive mechanical hand surrounded by a disruption field that allows it to crush tanks and shatter fortifications. But firepower and armor alone do not explain why dreadnoughts inspire such terror, particularly in orcs, who should relish the challenge of fighting such a formidable opponent. To understand that, we must look deeper at what a dreadnought truly represents. When a space marine is interred within a dreadnought, he does not simply become a weapons platform. He remains a thinking, feeling being, his consciousness preserved within the machine. Unlike a tank or an armored walker operated by a crew, a dreadnought has a soul, or at least the remnant of one. The warrior within maintains his personality, his memories, his tactical knowledge, and his absolute dedication to his chapter and the Emperor. However, the experience of being a dreadnought takes a tremendous psychological toll. The sensory deprivation is profound. The Space Marine can see through his optical sensors and hear through his audio pickups, but he cannot touch, cannot taste, cannot smell in the way he once did. His sense of his own body is replaced by the vast bulk of the war machine, his hands by weapons of destruction. The human experience is replaced by something utterly alien, neither fully man nor fully machine, but something in between. To prevent the warriors within from going mad from this existence, chapters typically keep their dreadnoughts in stasis when they are not needed for battle. The pilot sleeps away the centuries in a dreamless void, awakened only when war calls him forth, or when his counsel is required on matters of grave importance. Some dreadnoughts spend more time asleep than awake, their waking hours measured in battles fought rather than years lived. This creates warriors who exist outside normal time. A dreadnought might have been interred 1,000 years ago, or 5,000, or even longer. During those millennia, he has been awakened periodically for war, each time fighting and then returning to his slumber. He accumulates centuries of combat experience, fighting in wars and campaigns that become legend, witnessing events that pass into myth. A dreadnought becomes a living link to his chapter's past, a repository of knowledge and wisdom that spans ages. The oldest dreadnoughts are called venerable dreadnoughts, though the term is somewhat fluid. Generally, a dreadnought must have served for at least several centuries and fought in dozens or hundreds of battles before earning the title. These ancient warriors are treated with reverence by their younger brothers, honored as heroes and consulted as advisors. Their battle experience is literally irreplaceable, their tactical acumen honed over centuries of warfare against every enemy the Imperium has faced. Yet there is a price for this longevity. The mental strain of endless war, coupled with the isolation of dreadnought existence, slowly erodes the warrior's humanity. With each awakening, with each battle fought, and each return to stasis, something is lost. The organic components of the brain deteriorate slowly despite the life support systems. Memories fade, particularly the human memories from before internment. The personality itself can change, become harder, colder, more machine-like. This creates a unique psychology in dreadnoughts. They are simultaneously more and less than human. They possess the wisdom of ages and the tactical experience of hundreds of battles, yet they are removed from normal human concerns, operating according to a logic shaped by centuries of warfare. They are ancient heroes given form in metal and ceramite, death dealers with the accumulated knowledge of lifetimes of killing. And when an orc faces one of these ancient warriors, when a greenskin looks up at the towering form of a dreadnought, and some deep instinct tells him what stands before him, something primal awakens in the orc's simple psychology. Something that overrides his love of violence and whispers that this is wrong, this is unnatural, Oh, this is a foe unlike any other. The sound of thunder, Dreadnought combat. The first thing an orc typically notices about a dreadnought is not its appearance, but its sound. The approach of one of these war machines is heralded by a distinctive rhythm, a mechanical thunder that echoes across the battlefield and announces death's arrival with each pneumatic footfall. It is a sound unlike any other war machine the orcs encounter, deeper and more resonant than the scream of engines or the grinding of tank treads. It speaks of immense weight, of purpose, of something inexorable approaching. Each step of a dreadnought shakes the ground beneath it. The machine weighs several tons, its bulk concentrated into a chassis designed for stability and forward momentum. When it moves, it does so with a surprising grace that belies its massive size. As the result of sophisticated gyroscopic stabilization systems and the neural interface that allows the pilot to control it as naturally as he once controlled his own body. Yet despite this grace, or perhaps because of it, there is something profoundly unnatural about watching a dreadnought move. It walks with purpose. Not the shambling gait of an orc deaf dread or the mechanical precision of a smaller walker, but with the deliberate stride of something that knows exactly where it is going and what it will do when it arrives. There is no hesitation in its movements, no uncertainty. When a dreadnought advances, it does so with the absolute confidence of a warrior who has done this 10,000 times before and knows exactly how the next few minutes will unfold. The orcs, watching this approach, and see something that triggers multiple uncomfortable reactions simultaneously. The size is impressive, certainly. An orc respects size, and a dreadnought stands taller than all but the largest orc war bosses. But there is something wrong about the proportions, something that does not quite fit the orc understanding of how things should be shaped. It is too tall and too narrow, all vertical menace without the broad-shouldered bulk that orcs associate with proper strength. More disturbing is the way it moves. Orcs are used to fighting things that move like them, with energy and enthusiasm, charging forward with reckless abandon. Even enemy tanks and walkers typically move in ways that make sense to the orc mind, accelerating and maneuvering according to the logical principles of vehicles in motion. A dreadnought moves differently, yet it walks with the patience of something that has all the time in the world, advancing at a measured pace that speaks of absolute certainty that it will reach its destination regardless of what stands in its way. This triggers an uncomfortable realization in the orc psyche. The dreadnought is not hurrying to fight them. It is not excited or eager. It simply is coming, with the inevitability of a natural disaster. There is no bloodlust in its approach, no anticipation of violence, just the cold certainty of execution. For an orc, who fights with passion and enthusiasm, this emotionless advance is deeply unsettling. Then, the weapons open fire, and the orcs learn what true firepower means. The assault cannon is the most common ranged weapon mounted on Imperial dreadnoughts, and for good reason. This multi-barreled rotary cannon fires mass-reactive explosive rounds at a rate of hundreds per minute, creating a storm of explosive death that sweeps across the battlefield like a scythe through wheat. Each shell is designed to penetrate armor before detonating, maximizing damage against both vehicles and infantry. When an assault cannon opens fire, it sounds like continuous thunder, a rolling barrage that drowns out other sounds and fills the air with smoke and flame. Against orc infantry, an assault cannon is devastation incarnate. The shells tear through crude orc armor like it does not exist, detonating inside the bodies of their victims and reducing them to component pieces. An orc boy, tough and resilient by the standards of normal troops, provides no more resistance than a wet paper bag. Nobs. It's the elite orc warriors who lead mobs into battle, fare better but not by much. Their heavier armor and enhanced constitution allow them to perhaps survive 1 or 2 impacts. But the assault cannon fires hundreds of rounds, and probability is not their friend. What makes this particularly terrifying for orcs is the sustained nature of the fire. An orc expects combat to be choppy, intermittent. with periods of intense violence, followed by reloading or repositioning. An assault cannon just keeps firing. The rotary mechanism allows it to maintain a nearly continuous stream of explosive rounds, pausing only when the ammunition drum runs empty or when the dreadnought pilot decides he has killed everyone in front of him. The psychological impact of facing fire that does not stop cannot be overstated. But the assault cannon is only half the terror. The other arm of the dreadnought typically mounts a close combat weapon, most commonly a power fist, and this is where the true horror reveals itself. A dreadnought power fist is not simply a large version of the power fists carried by Space Marine sergeants and veterans. It is an engine of destruction scaled to match the dreadnought's size and strength, capable of exerting force measured in tons. The fist itself is usually a massive armored gauntlet, sometimes featuring individual articulated fingers, and sometimes designed as a vice-like crushing implement. Surrounding the fist is a power field, a disruption field generated by the weapon that allows it to tear through the atomic bonds of whatever it strikes. When a dreadnought power fist impacts a target, the results are catastrophic. Our infantry are simply obliterated, crushed to pulp by the sheer kinetic force before the power field even activates. Light vehicles crumple like tin cans, their armor proving no more resistant than cardboard. Heavier vehicles fare only slightly better, their armor giving way as the power field disrupts the molecular structure of the metal and the mechanical strength of the dreadnought tears through the weakened material. Orks, watching this devastation, see something that should be impressive in theory, but is actually horrifying in practice. An orc wants a good fight. He wants to struggle against a worthy opponent, to test his strength and skill, to triumph through effort and cunning. The dreadnought power fist eliminates that entirely. There is no contest, no back and forth, no chance for the orc to prove himself. The fist comes down, and whatever it strikes ceases to exist as a coherent object. More disturbing still is the built-in secondary weapon that most dreadnought power fists feature. Many mounts include a stormbolter or heavy flamer integrated into the wrist or palm of the fist, allowing the dreadnought to fire even while engaged in close combat. A stormbolter adds a rapid-fire stream of bolt rounds to the devastation, while a heavy flamer bathes everything in front of the dreadnought in burning promethium, turning orc mobs into living torches. The combination creates a psychological impact that goes beyond simple fear of death. An orc charging a dreadnought knows, on some instinctive level, that his death will not be glorious. He will not die in honorable combat against a worthy foe. He will simply be erased, crushed by a machine that does not acknowledge his existence as anything meaningful, reduced to red paste by a fist that does not care about his strength or his courage or his skill. His death will mean nothing, achieve nothing, contribute nothing to the grand narrative of orc conquest. And if he somehow survives the initial impact, if he manages to close with the dreadnought despite the assault cannon fire, if he brings his chopper down in a mighty blow against its armor, he discovers the final horror. His weapon bounces off. The ceramite and adamantium plating that protects a dreadnought is designed to withstand anti-tank weaponry. A crude orc blade, even one swung with the considerable strength of a large orc, accomplishes nothing. The greenskin might as well be striking a mountain for all the damage he does. This creates a moment of genuine terror for the orc. His whole worldview is built around the idea that strength matters, that a big enough orc with a sharp enough weapon can chop through anything. The dreadnought proves this belief false. It stands there, impervious, uncaring, and when it bothers to respond to the attack, it does so by simply swatting the orc aside with casual contempt. The power fist comes down, and the orc who thought himself a mighty warrior discovers he is nothing but an insect to be crushed. Orcs who survive encounters with dreadnoughts, who manage to retreat from battles where these war machines participate, carry with them a memory that is unusual for their species. They remember not the thrill of combat, but the horror of helplessness. They remember the sound of that mechanical thunder approaching, the sight of the assault cannon spooling up, the moment when they realized their weapons could not harm this foe, and its weapons could not miss them. And when they tell this story to other orcs, when they speak of the thing that walks like a warrior, but is made of metal and cannot be stopped. Something unusual happens. The other orcs listen. They do not scoff or call their brother a coward. They nod and they remember. And the next time they hear that distinctive mechanical tread approaching across a battlefield, they hesitate. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel what they would never call fear, but which any other species would recognize as exactly that. Ancient beyond measure, venerable dreadnoughts. Among the already formidable ranks of the Imperium's dreadnoughts, so there exist warriors who have transcended even the impressive longevity of their peers. These are the venerable dreadnoughts, machines that have walked the battlefields of the galaxy not for mere centuries, but for millennia. They are the keepers of their chapter's deepest traditions, the living memory of wars fought in ages past, and the wielders of combat experience so vast that even other space marines can barely comprehend its scope. The term venerable is not simply an honorary title bestowed after a certain number of years. It represents a fundamental transformation in both the nature of the warrior within and the reverence with which he is regarded by his chapter. A venerable dreadnought has fought in so many battles, seen so many warriors fall, and witnessed so many victories and defeats that his perspective extends beyond individual campaigns or even wars. He sees patterns that others miss, understands tactics in their deeper context, and possesses an institutional memory that is literally irreplaceable. Consider what it means to have fought for 1,000 years. Not to have lived for 1,000 years, spending most of that time in peace or quiet contemplation, but to have spent 1,000 years in actual combat. A venerable dreadnought awakens, fights a battle or a campaign, and then returns to stasis. Time passes, perhaps decades, perhaps a century or more. When he awakens again, the world has changed. Faces that were young are now old or dead.
You know, when I first got into Warhammer 40k lore, I thought the idea of orcs being scared of anything was ridiculous. I mean, these guys who paint their vehicles red because they think it makes them go faster, and it actually works because enough of them believe it. But the more I dug into the Dreadnought lore, especially reading about Bjorn and some of these ancient battles, the more I realized this isn't really about fear in the traditional sense. It's more like existential dread, if that makes sense. Like, imagine your entire purpose in life is fighting, and then when you meet something that makes fighting meaningless, that's genuinely horrifying when you think about it. Anyway, let me tell you what happens when these walking tombs actually enter combat.
Recruits he might have trained are now veterans or chapter masters. Enemies his chapter fought are extinct, replaced by new threats. Yet the venerable dreadnought adapts, fights, and returns once more to sleep. This cycle repeats hundreds of times across the millennia. Each awakening brings new enemies with new tactics, new weapons, new strategies. Each battle teaches new lessons, adds to the vast tactical database stored within the dreadnought's memory. Over time, this accumulation of experience creates something unique in the galaxy. A warrior who has literally seen it all, who has fought every enemy the Imperium faces, who knows from personal experience how battles unfold across centuries and how wars shape the course of history. This experience manifests in combat in ways that are difficult for younger warriors to understand. A venerable dreadnought does not simply react to battlefield situations, he anticipates them. And he recognizes patterns of attack and maneuver that he has seen play out 100 times before. He knows, with absolute certainty, what the enemy will do next, because he has fought this exact tactical situation or something very similar in battles fought centuries ago. His targeting is not just accurate but prescient. His movements not just efficient but optimal. For orcs facing a venerable dreadnought, this creates a psychological impact beyond the already considerable terror inspired by regular dreadnoughts. Orcs are intuitive fighters, guided by instinct and experience. A veteran orc war boss can read a battle and know where to commit his forces for maximum effect. When that war boss faces a venerable dreadnought, he discovers that his intuition fails him. Every tactical decision he makes seems to be anticipated. That every flanking maneuver is countered before it develops. Every moment of weakness is immediately exploited. It is as if the dreadnought can see the future. In truth, it simply knows the past so thoroughly that the future becomes obvious. When an orc mob prepares to charge from a particular position, the venerable dreadnought remembers 20 other battles where orcs charged from similar positions and knows exactly how fast they will arrive and where they will focus their attack. When an orc warboss moves his knobs to support a faltering flank, the dreadnought recognizes this as a standard tactical response and has already positioned himself to intercept them. This creates an experience for the orcs that borders on supernatural. They are facing a foe who seems to know their thoughts, who responds to their strategies before they fully implement them, who is always exactly where he needs to be at exactly the right moment. For a species whose tactical sophistication is limited, this level of battlefield awareness appears almost like sorcery. The physical presence of a venerable dreadnought amplifies this psychological impact. These ancient machines are typically adorned with honors and battle decorations accumulated over millennia. Their armor bears the marks of countless engagements, every dent and scar a story, every purity seal a prayer, every honorific inscription a victory. Where a regular dreadnought might carry the heraldry of its chapter, a venerable dreadnought is a walking shrine to that chapter's history. Purity seals cover its armor, each one applied by a chaplain or librarian as a blessing before battle. Honor badges mark specific victories or deeds of exceptional valor. The names of fallen brothers might be inscribed on its hull, a memorial carried into every fight. Battle damage from ancient wars is preserved rather than repaired, sacred scars that tell the story of the warrior's service. The overall effect is of something that is more than a mere war machine, something that carries the weight of ages and the blessing of the emperor himself. Orcs, despite their brutish nature, are not blind to symbolism. They understand the concept of honor badges and victory marks because their own culture employs similar concepts. When an orc sees a dreadnought covered in such decorations, some part of his mind understands, however dimly, that this is a warrior of exceptional skill and experience. This is not just a tough opponent, but a legendary one. The weapons carried by venerable dreadnoughts often enhance this impression. While any dreadnought can be equipped with a variety of weaponry, venerable dreadnoughts typically carry relics, master-crafted weapons that have been maintained and improved over centuries. These weapons are not simply functional, they are works of art, adorned with decorations and inscriptions, blessed by countless rituals, and proven in 10,000 battles. A venerable dreadnought's assault cannon might be a pattern not manufactured for thousands of years, its mechanism so refined through endless maintenance that it fires with perfect accuracy and reliability. His power fist might be a unique design, crafted by a legendary artificer in an age of myth, its power field generator enhanced with technologies lost to the current Imperium. Or even the armor plating might be of superior quality, forged in an age when the Imperium's forges produced war gear of a standard no longer achievable. The combat performance that results from this combination of experience, skill, and superior equipment creates legends. A venerable dreadnought does not simply win battles, he dominates them. His kill count in a single engagement might exceed that of an entire squad of regular space marines. His tactical acumen might turn the tide of an entire campaign. His mere presence on the battlefield can inspire nearby friendly forces while simultaneously demoralizing the enemy. For orcs, this creates a problem that their simple psychology struggles to process. They respect strength and skill. A venerable dreadnought possesses both in abundance, demonstrated repeatedly through combat performance. According to orc logic, such a powerful warrior should inspire not fear, but excitement, the prospect of a truly worthy fight. Yet something about the venerable dreadnought bypasses this logic and speaks directly to a more primal response. Perhaps it is the age itself that disturbs them. Orcs grow through combat, with the biggest orcs being the oldest and most experienced fighters. But no orc lives for millennia. Even the most powerful war boss might survive a few centuries at most before age, accumulated injuries, or younger challengers bring him down. The concept of a warrior who has fought for thousands of years is alien and unsettling. It violates the Ork understanding of how life should work. Or perhaps it is the cold precision of the venerable Dreadnoughts' warfare that disturbs them. Orks fight with passion and enthusiasm, by pouring emotion into every battle. A venerable Dreadnought fights with the emotional detachment of someone who has seen this all before and knows exactly how it will end. There is no anger in his attacks, no fear in his defense, no satisfaction in his victories. He simply processes targets with mechanical efficiency, his humanity eroded by centuries of warfare until only the warrior instinct remains. Whatever the cause, Orks who face venerable Dreadnoughts and survive carry with them a story that spreads through their species' oral tradition. They speak of ancient warriors who cannot die, who have fought since before time, who know all the secrets of war and cannot be defeated through any strategy or tactic the Orks possess. These stories, told and retold, become part of Ork culture. In warnings passed from one generation of greenskins to the next about the dangers of facing certain foes. And among all the venerable Dreadnoughts who inspire such tales, among all the ancient warriors whose names have become legend, one stands supreme, a warrior so old and so skilled that his name alone carries weight across the galaxy. A warrior who embodies everything that makes Orks fear these walking tombs, and whose legend has spread even among species that do not normally remember specific enemies. That warrior's name is Bjorn, and he is called the Fell-Handed. Bjorn, the Fell-Handed, a legend that echoes. In the vast and varied history of the Adeptus Astartes, spanning 10,000 years and encompassing millions of warriors, certain names rise above the countless others to achieve something approaching true immortality. These are not just famous warriors or successful commanders, but legends whose deeds echo across millennia, whose stories are told and retold until they blur the line between history and myth. Among these legends, among heroes who have achieved impossible victories and performed miraculous feats, one name stands supreme in terms of sheer longevity and accumulated glory. Bjorn the Fell-Handed of the Space Wolves is the oldest living space marine in the entire Imperium, with the exception of the Emperor himself, who lies suspended in undeath upon the Golden Throne. Bjorn fought during the Great Crusade, that golden age when the Emperor walked among men and the Imperium expanded across the galaxy in a campaign of conquest and enlightenment. He served under Leman Russ, the Primarch of the Space Wolves, but one of the Emperor's genetically engineered sons, who commanded legions of warriors in the Emperor's name. More than 10,000 years have passed since those days. Think about that timescale for a moment. 10,000 years ago, on Terra itself, human civilization was just beginning to develop agriculture and build the first permanent settlements. All of recorded human history from ancient Mesopotamia to the present day spans roughly the same period that Bjorn has existed. Empires have risen and fallen, species have gone extinct, stars have burned out, and through all of it, Bjorn has endured, sleeping away the centuries in his dreadnought sarcophagus, awakening periodically to fight in wars that become the stuff of legend. His story begins not as a hero but as an ordinary space wolf, as a grey hunter serving in the Third Great Company during the Great Crusade. His first notable action in the historical records is actually a mistake. He accidentally shot down the shuttle carrying a remembrancer, a civilian historian attached to the Space Wolves to record their deeds. This mistake resulted in Bjorn being assigned as the remembrancer's bodyguard as punishment, a duty he performed with sullen resentment. Yet from these humble beginnings, greatness emerged. During the Battle of Prospero, when the Space Wolves were ordered to sanction the Thousand Suns for violating the Emperor's edicts against sorcery, Bjorn distinguished himself in combat. More importantly, he demonstrated courage and determination in the face of demonic threats, fighting with a ferocity that impressed even his notoriously aggressive brothers. And it was during this campaign that Bjorn encountered a demon, a being of pure malice given form through the warp. This demon slaughtered Bjorn's entire squad, killing his brothers one by one until only he remained. In that moment, faced with the death of everyone he cared about and the mocking laughter of the demon responsible, something changed in Bjorn. He swore an oath of vengeance, declaring himself a lone wolf, the first space wolf to take this vow in recorded history. This oath bound Bjorn to hunt the demon that had killed his brothers, to pursue it across the galaxy if necessary, to never rest until vengeance was achieved. Such oaths are spiritually binding for the space wolves, who treat promises with absolute seriousness.
Bjorn would neither drink ale nor feast with his brothers until the daemon was destroyed and his fallen comrades avenged. Years later, Bjorn encountered the daemon again. This time, he was prepared. This time, he knew what he faced. In a battle that has passed into Space Wolf legend, Bjorn fought the demon in single combat and destroyed it utterly, banishing it back to the warp with such violence that it has never been seen again in the 10,000 years since. The ferocity of this victory, the absolute totality of the demon's destruction, impressed even Leman Russ himself. The Primarch appeared before Bjorn and declared his oath fulfilled, promoting him on the spot to the Wolf Guard, the Primarch's personal retinue of elite warriors. It was at this moment that Bjorn received his famous epithet, Leman Russ, yet in recognition of Bjorn's skill and the demon-killing claw he wielded, named him Bjorn the Fell-Handed. The title would stay with him through all the ages to come, becoming perhaps the most famous name in all the Space Wolves' long history. Bjorn continued to serve with distinction throughout the Horus Heresy, that terrible civil war that nearly destroyed the Imperium. He fought alongside Leman Russ in countless battles, witnessed the Emperor's confrontation with Horus, and survived the apocalyptic conflicts that reshaped the galaxy. When Leman Russ finally departed for the Eye of Terror on his mysterious final journey, seeking something unknown in the depths of that cursed realm, he left Bjorn behind as the only member of his personal guard not to accompany him. This decision haunted Bjorn for centuries. Yet he loved Leman Russ more than any other being, regarded the Primarch as a father figure and the greatest warrior he had ever known. To be left behind felt like rejection, felt like being found wanting. Yet Russ had his reasons. He knew that Bjorn possessed the strength of will and the depth of wisdom necessary to guide the Space Wolves through the difficult years ahead. He knew that Bjorn would survive, would endure, would be exactly the steady hand the chapter needed when faced with impossible challenges. After Russ's departure, Bjorn became the first Great Wolf, the first chapter master of the Space Wolves in their new organization, as a chapter rather than a legion. He led his brothers through the tumultuous years of the Scouring, hunting down traitor forces and helping to restore order to the Imperium. Yet his leadership was marked by the same determination and ferocity that had characterized his service as a warrior. In the year 934 of the 31st Millennium, approximately 500 years after the end of the Horus Heresy, Bjorn's mortal body finally failed him. During a raid on a fortress stronghold in the Proxima Rebellion, he suffered wounds so catastrophic that even Space Marine physiology could not heal them. His spine was shattered, his organs ruptured, his body broken beyond any hope of recovery. By all rights, he should have died there on that battlefield, his gene seed harvested for future generations, and his name added to the rolls of honored dead. Instead, the Space Wolves' Iron Priests, their technical specialists who maintain the chapter's equipment and weapons, made the decision to enter him within a dreadnought. The choice was controversial, even then. Many believed that death in battle was the proper end for a warrior of Bjorn's stature, that to deny him this final honor was cruel. But the Iron Priests argued that Bjorn's knowledge and experience were too valuable to lose, that his counsel would be needed in the difficult millennia ahead. They were proven correct beyond all expectation. For the next 10,000 years, Bjorn has served the Space Wolves as both warrior and advisor, awakened when his chapter faces its darkest hours, or when his ancient wisdom is needed to solve seemingly impossible problems. He has participated in hundreds of battles across those millennia, fighting in conflicts that have shaped the fate of entire sectors.
His personal kill count is said to exceed that of some entire Space Marine chapters. His combat capability, even entombed within his Dreadnought shell, remains formidable. Bjorn's Dreadnought chassis is among the most technologically advanced in existence, incorporating systems and technologies that were rare even during the Horus Heresy and are now completely irreplaceable. His armor is thicker than standard Dreadnought plating, incorporating materials and techniques lost to the current Imperium. His weapons are mastercrafted relics, maintained with fanatical devotion by the Iron Priests, who regard servicing Bjorn's war machine as among their most sacred duties. His primary weapon is True Claw, a massive lightning claw designed specifically for his Dreadnought body. This weapon is a scaled-up version of the Wolf Claw he wielded in his mortal days, the same weapon he used to destroy the demon that killed his brothers all those millennia ago. The True Claw crackles with barely contained power, its energy field capable of tearing through the toughest armor with contemptuous ease. Enemies struck by this weapon are not simply killed, they are annihilated, ripped apart by forces that bypass conventional defenses. His secondary weapons vary depending on the tactical requirements of each deployment, but typically include an assault cannon or plasma cannon for ranged combat, and a heavy flamer integrated into the True Claw itself for dealing with masses of infantry. The combination allows Bjorn to engage any enemy at any range with devastating effectiveness. But Bjorn's true weapon is not his equipment, formidable though it is. His real advantage is the 10,000 years of combat experience that guides every decision he makes on the battlefield. He has fought Orks, Tyranids, Chaos, Space Marines, Dark Eldar, Necrons, Tau, and every other major threat the Imperium faces. He has witnessed the development of new tactics and weapon systems. He has seen how different enemies adapt to changing circumstances. He knows, with absolute certainty, how battles will unfold because he has fought versions of these battles hundreds of times across the millennia. When Bjorn engages Orks on the battlefield, he brings to bear this vast repository of knowledge. He knows Ork tactics better than most Ork warbosses do themselves, having fought their kind since the Great Crusade. He can predict with uncanny accuracy how an Ork assault will develop, where the warboss will commit his reserves, when the greenskins will attempt to flank or retreat. This allows him to position himself optimally and to maximize his firepower against the most critical targets, to break Ork attacks at their weakest points. The psychological impact on the Orks is profound. They see this ancient war machine advancing toward them, its armor covered in honor badges and purity seals, and something in their genetic memory recognizes danger. The Gestalt psychic field that connects all Orks carries memories, not specific detailed recollections, but general impressions of threats and dangers passed down through their spore-based reproduction. Somewhere in that collective unconscious, there are traces of previous encounters with Bjorn, echoes of defeats suffered at his hands by Ork forces across the millennia. More immediately, Orks facing Bjorn in the current era experience his combat prowess directly. They watch as their mobs are shredded by precisely aimed fire. They see their knobs crushed by the True Claw with casual efficiency. They observe their most cunning tactical maneuvers anticipated and countered before they can develop. And they recognize, on some instinctive level, that they are facing something exceptional, something that transcends the normal categories of threat they understand. Bjorn's reputation has spread even among Ork culture, where specific enemies are rarely remembered for long. Orks who have fought against the Space Wolves and survived might not remember Bjorn's name, but they remember the ancient warrior in the metal body, the one who fights with cold precision and cannot be stopped by any weapon they possess. They tell stories around their fires about the walker that has fought since the beginning of time. That has killed more Orks than any warlord can count, that will continue to kill Orks until the end of days. These stories serve as cautionary tales within Ork society, warnings about the dangers of underestimating particular foes. An Ork warboss planning an assault against Space Wolves' forces might be told by his older advisors about the Ancient One, about the walker covered in honor marks, about the legendary warrior whose fury never dims and whose skill never fails. And that war boss, if he is wise by Orc standards, will make sure to bring extra forces, more heavy weapons, better planning than he might otherwise employ. This is perhaps the ultimate testament to Bjorn's impact on his enemies. He is one of the few individual Imperial warriors that Orcs actively fear facing, whose reputation precedes him even among a species that normally regards death in battle as the highest honor. When word spreads through an Orc warband that the Ancient One fights among the Space Wolves in this engagement, the Greenskins prepare differently. They commit more forces, they approach with greater caution, and when battle is finally joined, and they see that ancient form striding through their lines, dealing death with every shot and every swing of the true claw, they understand why the stories spoke of him with such uncharacteristic concern. Bjorn the Fell-Handed represents everything that makes certain dreadnoughts objects of terror for the Orcs. He is ancient beyond comprehension, skilled beyond measure, and absolutely implacable in his prosecution of war. He is the past given form, death given purpose, and the Emperor's wrath made manifest. And he will continue fighting, sleeping away the centuries between battles, until the day Lemon Russ returns, or the galaxy itself comes to an end. For the Orcs, facing Bjorn means confronting their own mortality in a way that normal combat never does. It means recognizing that some warriors are simply beyond their ability to overcome, that all their strength and ferocity and numbers count for nothing against 10,000 years of accumulated skill. It means understanding, however briefly, that they are not the universe's ultimate warriors, that there exist beings who transcend their comprehension and will continue to exist long after their warbands are nothing but dust scattered across forgotten battlefields. And in that recognition, in that moment of understanding, the Orcs feel something they would never admit to feeling. They feel fear. The contradiction. Why Orcs fear what they should love. At first glance, the concept of Orcs fearing dreadnoughts seems to contradict everything we know about the Greenskins. These are creatures who live for combat, who regard death in battle as the highest honor, who charge into gunfire with reckless abandon while laughing at the prospect of violence. By all rights, dreadnoughts should be exactly the kind of enemy that Orcs most enjoy fighting. Big, tough, deadly, and offering the promise of a proper scrap. Yet the reality is more complex, because what frightens Orcs is not the same as what frightens other species. To understand this paradox, we must first recognize that Orcs do not fear death or pain in the conventional sense. An Orc expects to die eventually, and he hopes that when his time comes, it will be in glorious battle against a worthy foe. Pain is something he experiences and acknowledges, but it does not slow him down significantly. An Orc who loses an arm in combat might pause to look at the stump, grunt in annoyance, and then continue fighting with his remaining hand. Physical suffering simply does not register as a deterrent in the Orc psychology. What Orcs do fear, or more accurately what creates deep discomfort in their primitive minds, are things that violate their fundamental understanding of how the universe should operate. The Orc worldview is remarkably simple and built on straightforward principles. Bigger is better, stronger wins. Fighting is good, cowardice is bad. These axioms guide every aspect of Orc behavior, and they work well enough for most situations the Greenskins encounter. Dreadnoughts, particularly ancient ones like Bjorn, violate several of these principles simultaneously in ways that create profound cognitive dissonance for the Orcs observing them. First, there is the matter of what a dreadnought actually is. Orcs understand fighting machines. They build their own versions, the Def Dreads, which are ramshackle combat walkers piloted by Orcs who volunteer for permanent installation in a metal shell in exchange for increased killing power. But an Orc Def Dread is clearly a machine with an Orc inside. The Orc can be heard yelling through the armor plates, his frustration and enthusiasm evident in every movement. There is no question about what the Def Dread is. It is a tool used by an Orc to fight better. But an Imperial Dreadnought presents a different picture. The Space Marine within is completely hidden, sealed inside the sarcophagus at the machine's core. The Dreadnought's voice, when it speaks, comes through mechanical speakers and carries none of the emotional inflection that Orks associate with living beings. Its movements, while fluid and controlled, have a quality that seems almost too precise, too calculated to be driven by a living pilot reacting in real time. This creates uncertainty in the Ork mind about whether the Dreadnought is a warrior in a machine or the machine itself somehow alive. The distinction matters to Orks because they understand and respect warriors, even enemy ones, but feel uncomfortable around machines that seem to possess independent will. The Gestalt psychic field that connects all Orks is attuned to living beings. When an Ork looks at a Space Marine, even one who is his enemy, the psychic field recognizes a fellow living creature. When an Ork looks at a tank, the field recognizes a mechanical object. When an Ork looks at a Dreadnought, the field cannot decide. There is something alive in there, certainly, but it is so buried and so merged with the machine that the Ork cannot get a clear sense of what he is facing. This ambiguity triggers a response that is uncommon for Orks: uncertainty. And uncertainty, for a species whose entire psychology is built on straightforward confidence, is profoundly disturbing. Second, there is the matter of how Dreadnoughts fight. Orks appreciate enthusiastic violence. They love warriors who charge into battle with wild abandon, and who throw themselves at the enemy without regard for personal safety, who fight with passion and fury. This is how Orks themselves fight, and it is behavior they understand and respect, even in their enemies. A Space Marine assault squad, charging with chainswords roaring, is something an Ork can appreciate, even as he prepares to meet that charge with his own weapons. A Dreadnought does not fight this way. Instead, it advances with measured, deliberate steps, analyzing the battlefield and eliminating threats with cold efficiency. There is no fury in its assault cannon fire, no rage in its power fist strikes, no battle cry as it wades through enemy formations. It simply processes targets, prioritizing threats according to tactical calculations that have nothing to do with emotion or excitement. Yet this emotionless killing disturbs Orks on a fundamental level. They believe, even if they cannot articulate it clearly, that fighting should mean something. It should be personal. It should involve passion and hatred and the thrill of violence. A warrior who kills without emotion is, to the Ork mind, something wrong and unnatural. It violates their understanding of what combat should be. The experience of actually fighting a Dreadnought reinforces this discomfort. When an Ork charges at a regular Space Marine, both warriors are engaged in the same fundamental activity, trying to kill each other with weapons and strength. There is a certain equality to the exchange, even if one warrior is more skilled or better equipped than the other. Both are risking their lives, both are committed to the fight, both care about the outcome. When an Ork charges at a Dreadnought, that equality vanishes. The Dreadnought is not risking anything in any meaningful sense. Its armor will turn aside the Ork's weapons. Its firepower will obliterate the Ork long before he closes to melee range. And if somehow the Ork does manage to reach striking distance, his strongest blow will accomplish nothing, while the Dreadnought's casual backhand will reduce him to pulp. There is no contest here, no battle, just execution. This creates what might be called an existential horror for the Ork. His entire purpose in life is to fight. It is the thing he is genetically programmed to do, the activity that brings him the greatest satisfaction, the goal around which his entire culture is organized. When fighting becomes meaningless, but when his participation in combat accomplishes nothing and affects nothing, the Ork's sense of self and purpose is threatened. Third, there is the matter of age and continuity. Orks grow larger and stronger through combat, with the biggest Orks being the oldest and most experienced warriors. This creates a natural progression where young Orks serve under older ones, learning the ways of war from those who have survived longer. Eventually, an Ork either dies in battle or grows large enough to challenge his superiors and potentially take their place. The system works because it is based on observable reality. The biggest orc in the mob is usually the toughest and the best fighter. But this system has built-in limitations. Even the largest orc warboss is still subject to time and injury. He might rule for decades, or even a century, if he is particularly clever and lucky, but eventually he will be brought down by accumulated wounds, by a particularly fierce rival, or by simple old age. The position of warboss is transitory, passing from one orc to another as circumstances change. A venerable dreadnought violates this principle utterly. It does not age in the way orcs understand aging. It does not weaken over time. It does not face challenges from younger, stronger rivals seeking to take its position. Instead, it simply endures, century after century, millennium after millennium, growing not physically larger, but more skilled and more dangerous with each passing age. This concept of eternal service, of a warrior who never retires and never dies of natural causes, is alien to the orc mindset. It suggests a kind of existence that orcs cannot fully comprehend. An orc exists in the moment, living for the current fight with little thought for the distant future or the distant past. The idea of a warrior whose service spans thousands of years, who remembers battles fought in ages of legend, who will still be fighting long after every orc currently alive has died and been forgotten, is almost incomprehensible. When an orc learns he is facing a dreadnought that has fought for 5,000 years, or 8,000 years, or in Bjorn's case, more than 10,000 years, something breaks in his simple understanding of how things should work. That length of time is meaningless to an orc's perception. He cannot imagine what 10,000 years feels like. But he can understand, in a general sense, that he is facing something very old, and that every other orc who has faced this enemy has lost and died, while the enemy itself continues unchanged. This creates a rare moment of perspective for the orc. He recognizes that he is not special, that he is just one more greenskin in an endless line of greenskins who have fought this particular foe. He understands that when he dies, which he probably will if he fights this thing, his death will mean nothing to his opponent. The dreadnought will return to its stasis sleep, and when it awakens again in 50 or 100 years, it will not remember this particular battle or this particular orc. He will have been just one more target eliminated, utterly forgotten among thousands or tens of thousands of similar encounters. This realization that his death will be meaningless and unmemorable strikes at the core of what an orc wants from combat. An orc hopes to die fighting a worthy enemy, to make his death count for something, to be remembered as a warrior who gave a good account of himself. Against a dreadnought, particularly an ancient one, none of these hopes can be fulfilled. His death will be swift, efficient, and instantly forgotten. Finally, there is the matter of how dreadnoughts break orc morale through simple persistence. Orcs are brave, even recklessly so, but they are not stupid. They can recognize when a situation is hopeless, when continued fighting will accomplish nothing but their own deaths. Normally, this recognition leads to tactical withdrawal, with the orcs pulling back to regroup and try a different approach. This is not cowardice in their eyes, but sensible strategy. Against a dreadnought, withdrawal becomes difficult. These war machines do not tire. They do not stop to rest or regroup. They do not slow down or become less effective as the battle continues. Instead, they just keep coming, advancing with that same measured pace, firing with that same deadly accuracy, crushing anything that gets close with that same implacable strength. An orc mob might fall back, reposition, and charge again, only to find that the dreadnought has advanced to meet them and is now even closer than before. This creates a psychological pressure that accumulates over time. The orcs cannot hurt the dreadnought significantly, cannot slow it down, cannot make it cautious or defensive. All they can do is die. And as more and more of the mob dies, while the dreadnought remains unchanged, now the remaining orcs begin to experience something unusual for their species. a loss of faith in victory. Orks fight best when they believe they are winning. The Gestalt psychic field that connects them grows stronger when they are successful, reinforcing their belief in their own invincibility and making their weapons more effective. But that same field can weaken if enough orcs begin to doubt. When an orc watches his biggest knobs get crushed, his best shooters picked off, his war boss unable to land a telling blow, the psychic energy that sustained his confidence begins to ebb. This creates a cascade effect. As the orcs' collective confidence weakens, their weapons become less effective. Their bullets miss more often, their vehicles break down more frequently, their coordination deteriorates. This makes them even less effective in combat, which further reduces their confidence, which weakens them more. Against most enemies, orcs can reverse this spiral by achieving some success, landing a good hit, or breaking through enemy lines. Against a dreadnought, such successes are virtually impossible to achieve. The result is something rare in orc warfare: genuine panic. The orcs break not because they are more afraid of dying than of being called cowards, but because their entire psychological framework has collapsed. They no longer believe they can win. They no longer believe their weapons can hurt the enemy. They no longer believe that continued fighting will accomplish anything. And without that belief, they are no longer really orcs in the way their species defines itself. They become just frightened creatures fleeing from a threat they cannot overcome. This is the ultimate expression of why certain dreadnoughts, particularly the ancient and skilled ones, inspire terror in orcs, despite the greenskins' natural love of combat. These war machines violate every principle of orc psychology simultaneously. They are ambiguous when orcs prefer clarity, emotionless when orcs value passion, eternal when orcs are transitory, and unstoppable when orcs believe everything can be overcome through sufficient violence. The fear that dreadnoughts inspire in orcs is not the simple fear of danger or death, which orcs do not feel. It is something deeper and more disturbing: the fear of meaninglessness, the horror of facing an enemy against whom their strength and courage count for nothing. Yet the existential terror of realizing that they are small and temporary things, facing something vast and eternal that will continue long after they are forgotten. And of all the many terrors of the 41st millennium, this particular fear may be the most profound, because it strikes not at the orc's body, but at his very sense of self and purpose. Patterns of terror, different dreadnought types. While all dreadnoughts inspire a certain degree of unease in orcs who face them, the specific type of dreadnought involved can significantly affect both the nature and intensity of this response. The Imperium fields multiple patterns of dreadnoughts, each with its own design philosophy, capabilities, and combat role. To the orcs encountering these machines on the battlefield, each pattern presents a slightly different flavor of the same fundamental terror. The Castraferum pattern dreadnought, the most common type in service throughout the Imperium, is what most orcs think of when they envision this particular threat. These are the war machines they have encountered most frequently, the ones whose image is burned into the collective memory of orc culture. The Castraferum is visually distinctive, with its blocky, upright stance and the prominent sarcophagus visible in the center of its chest. This visibility of the pilot's container is actually psychologically significant for orcs. When an orc sees the sarcophagus, some part of his mind understands that there is a warrior inside this machine, that he is fighting something that was once alive like himself. This recognition provides a small measure of comfort and a framework for understanding the threat. The orc can tell himself that this is just a warrior in very good armor, that if he can damage the sarcophagus, he can win. Of course, damaging the sarcophagus is nearly impossible given the thickness of the armor protecting it, but the theoretical possibility exists. The Castraferum's combat performance reinforces its reputation through sheer consistency. These dreadnoughts have served for thousands of years with minimal changes to their design, which means that the tactics and capabilities orcs face today are essentially the same as those their ancestors faced centuries ago. Stories about encounters with Castroferum dreadnoughts accumulate in Ork oral tradition, each tale adding to the mystique and building a composite picture of what to expect. When an Ork spots the distinctive silhouette of a Castroferum pattern dreadnought, he knows what is coming. The assault cannon will open fire, creating that distinctive, thunderous roar. The power fist will crush anything that gets close. The war machine will advance with that same measured stride that every Ork who has faced these things describes in their stories. This predictability might seem like an advantage, allowing the Orks to prepare. But in practice, it makes things worse because they know from past experience that their preparations will not be enough. The Contemptor pattern. Dreadnought presents a different profile and generates a different psychological response. These are relic machines, dating back to the Great Crusade and the Horus Heresy, larger and more sophisticated than the later Castroferum pattern. And only the most venerable chapters still possess functioning Contemptor dreadnoughts, and those that do maintain them with fanatical devotion, awakening these ancient warriors only for the most critical battles. To Ork eyes, the Contemptor looks more alien than the Castroferum. Its sarcophagus is less prominently visible, more fully integrated into the chassis. The armor has a different texture, smoother and more refined, clearly the product of a more sophisticated manufacturing process. The proportions are subtly wrong, more elegant than the blocky Castroferum, but in a way that makes it look less like a machine and more like some kind of artificial creature. Contemptor dreadnoughts typically carry more advanced weapons than their newer counterparts, and including patterns of assault cannon and power systems that are no longer manufacturable in the current era. When a Contemptor pattern dreadnought opens fire, the Orks facing it often notice that its weapons seem somehow different, more accurate, more devastating than they remember from previous encounters. This difference is hard to quantify, but creates a subconscious recognition that this is not a standard threat. The atomic shield technology that some Contemptor dreadnoughts employ adds another layer of horror to the Ork experience. These energy shields allow the dreadnought to shrug off hits that would damage a standard chassis, creating the impression that the war machine is not just heavily armored, but actually invulnerable. When an Ork's strongest weapons bounce off without effect, and when the combined fire of an entire mob fails to slow the target, the Ork's confidence in his ability to affect the outcome of the battle evaporates. More disturbing still are the ironclad dreadnoughts, specialized siege warfare variants that are armored even more heavily than standard patterns and equipped with unique close combat weapons designed for breaching fortifications. The ironclad patterns sacrifice some ranged firepower for enhanced protection and devastating melee capabilities, mounting weapons like seismic hammers and chain fists that can tear through the heaviest armor with contemptuous ease. To an Ork, the ironclad dreadnought represents an amplification of everything terrifying about standard dreadnoughts. The armor is thicker, which means their weapons are even less effective. The close combat weapons are more devastating, which means that getting close, the traditional Ork solution to range threats, is even more suicidal than usual. And the ironclad's specialized role as a siege breaker means it is typically deployed in the densest fighting, the places where Orks concentrate their forces, ensuring maximum casualties among the greenskins. The psychological impact of seeing an ironclad dreadnought smash through defenses that should have been impenetrable cannot be overstated. Orks build crude fortifications, nothing sophisticated but thick enough and solid enough to stop most attacks. When an ironclad simply walks through these defenses, its seismic hammer reducing barriers to rubble with contemptuous ease, the Orks behind those barriers lose their sense of safety. If their strongest defenses cannot slow this thing, what chance do they have? Or then there are the chapter-specific variants that add unique terrors to the standard Dreadnought template. The Blood Angels chapter, and their successors, Field, Furioso Dreadnoughts, which are equipped with specialized close combat weapons and exhibit an almost disturbing aggression in battle. Where a standard dreadnought advances with measured deliberation, a Furioso charges forward with barely controlled fury, its blood-red armor and Death Company markings announcing that something very angry is coming to tear you apart. For orcs, who pride themselves on their own aggression and fury, the Furioso presents a psychological challenge. This is not the cold, emotionless killing of a standard dreadnought, but something that approaches the orc's own style of warfare. Yet it is still wrapped in all the invulnerability and firepower advantages of a dreadnought chassis, creating a hybrid threat that combines the terror of facing an unstoppable machine with the visceral horror of facing an enemy that wants to kill you with personal intensity. The Mortis pattern, Dreadnought, specialized in fire support rather than assault, creates terror through sheer, sustained firepower. These dreadnoughts sacrifice close combat capability to mount two ranged weapons, often twin-linked lascannons or twin-linked autocannons that can pour devastating fire into enemy formations from extended range. An orc mob advancing toward a Mortis dreadnought finds itself under continuous, accurate fire for the entire approach, watching as their numbers dwindle with each passing second while the target itself remains safely out of reach. Yet the newer Primaris dreadnought patterns add modern nightmares to the ancient ones. The Redemptor pattern, the most common Primaris dreadnought, is larger and more powerful than the Castraferum it was designed to replace. To orcs seeing one for the first time, the size difference is immediately apparent and troubling. If the standard dreadnought is terrifying, what does it mean that the Imperium has built an even bigger version? The Redemptor's weapons reinforce this impression of enhanced threat. Its heavy onslaught Gatling cannon can fire at an even higher rate than a standard assault cannon, creating an almost unbroken stream of explosive rounds that obliterates anything in its path. The macroplasma incinerator it often carries as an alternative provides devastating anti-armor firepower, vaporizing vehicles with each shot. And when equipped for close combat, the Redemptor's power fist is proportionally larger and more destructive than its Castraferum equivalent. More unsettling for the orcs is the Redemptor's more aggressive and less stable nature compared to older patterns. The connection between pilot and machine is more intense, the strain on the warrior within more severe. This creates a combat style that seems almost desperate, as if the dreadnought itself knows its time is limited and wants to kill as much as possible before that time runs out. This intensity translates into battlefield performance that is, if anything, more terrifying than the cold efficiency of older patterns. The Brutalis pattern dreadnought takes the Primaris philosophy to an extreme, creating a close combat specialist that is essentially a walking avalanche of destruction. Armed with twin power fists and additional weapons mounted throughout its chassis, the Brutalis charges into enemy formations with one purpose: to tear them apart at close range. Where other dreadnoughts might fire from a distance or advance carefully to minimize risk, the Brutalis simply runs forward and starts breaking things. To orcs, who should theoretically appreciate this straightforward approach to violence, the Brutalis represents something deeply wrong. This is their style of fighting, the charge and the melee, the close quarters brawl where strength and fury determine the victor. Yet the Brutalis does this better than any orc can, its twin power fists crushing multiple opponents simultaneously, its heavy bolt rifles firing even as it closes, its armor impervious to the counterattacks of those it is killing. Whilst it takes the orc's own tactical approach and demonstrates its superior version, proving that even in their preferred style of warfare, they are outmatched. Each of these patterns contributes to the overall terror that dreadnoughts inspire in orc psychology, but they do so in different ways. The standard patterns create fear through their reliability and invulnerability. The ancient patterns like the Contemptor create fear through their evident superiority and the weight of their history. The specialized patterns like the Furioso and Ironclad create fear by being even more extreme versions of an already terrifying threat. And the new Primaris patterns create fear through their size and aggressive combat doctrine that somehow makes them even more dangerous than their predecessors. The result is a composite image in orc culture of dreadnoughts as a category of threat that cannot be easily countered. Regardless of the specific pattern encountered, certain characteristics remain constant. Heavy armor, powerful weapons, implacable advance, and the presence of an ancient warrior's consciousness directing the machine. These consistent elements, repeated across every variant, reinforce the Ork belief that dreadnoughts are fundamentally different from other enemies and require special caution when encountered. And when multiple dreadnoughts deploy together, as they sometimes do in major engagements, the psychological impact multiplies exponentially. An Ork might steel himself to face one of these machines, convincing himself through force of will that he can overcome this challenge. But when he sees 3 dreadnoughts advancing in formation, or 5, or an entire wing of these ancient warriors awakened for battle, something inside him breaks. This is not a challenge to overcome, but a catastrophe to survive. And survival means recognizing when you are beaten and fleeing while you still can. The unflinching advance. There is a particular moment in battle, repeated across countless engagements on innumerable worlds, that encapsulates everything about why Orks fear certain dreadnoughts. It is the moment when the Ork realizes that nothing he does makes any difference, that all his fury and strength and courage amount to nothing against the entity advancing toward him. This realization often comes during what military analysts call the advance phase, those critical minutes when a dreadnought moves from its deployment position toward its designated combat zone, crossing ground that is typically covered by enemy fire. Picture the scene from the Ork perspective. The greenskin has established a firing position, perhaps behind a crude barricade or in a shell crater. He has his shooter loaded and ready, or perhaps a rocket launcher, if he is lucky enough to have scavenged one. His mates are positioned nearby, forming a mob strong enough to bring down even tough targets through concentrated fire. They have fought Space Marines before and know how to kill them. They are confident in their numbers and their firepower. Then they see the dreadnought. At first, it appears as a shape in the distance, perhaps emerging from smoke or cresting a ridgeline. The Orks identify it as a target and open fire immediately, their crude but powerful weapons sending a stream of projectiles downrange. Bullets spark off the dreadnought's armor. Rocket warheads detonate against its hull, creating impressive explosions that accomplish nothing. The Orks fire and fire, emptying magazine after magazine, certain that eventually they will damage this thing. But the dreadnought does not stop. It does not even slow down. It just keeps walking, one measured step after another, advancing toward the Ork position with mechanical precision. Small arms fire, bounces off its ceramite plating without leaving so much as a scratch. Heavier weapons that would disable a regular vehicle merely score the paint. The dreadnought seems not to notice the incoming fire at all, does not acknowledge the Ork's attempts to hurt it, simply continues its advance as if the battle is already over and the outcome already decided. This is where the psychological warfare truly begins. The Orks are not yet afraid, not in any way they would recognize as fear. They are frustrated, certainly, and increasingly concerned about their inability to affect the target. But they still believe in their ability to overcome this challenge. They shoot more, shoot faster, aim for weak points they imagine must exist somewhere on this machine. They curse and shout encouragement to each other, building their confidence through noise and bravado. Meanwhile, the dreadnought speaks. Its mechanical voice cuts across the battlefield through external speakers, not a battle cry or a threat, but often a calm statement of tactical assessment or a quote from imperial scripture. This is psychologically devastating for the Orks because it demonstrates how little the dreadnought considers them a threat. A warrior in the heat of combat does not have time for quotations and commentary. The dreadnought's calm voice reveals that it is not under pressure, not concerned, not fighting for its life. It is simply performing a task, clearing obstacles from its path. At some point during this advance, the dreadnought's weapons enter their optimal range and it begins to return fire. The assault cannon spools up, and suddenly, Orks are dying. Not dying in the glorious one-on-one combat they might prefer, but but simply being obliterated, reduced to red spray by explosive shells that arrive too fast to dodge. The orc next to you is there 1 second and gone the next, nothing left but a stain and scattered equipment. Yes, the orcs adjust their tactics because they are not stupid despite their brutish appearance. They seek cover, spread out, try to flank the target, or maneuver to its rear where the armor might be weaker. But the Dreadnought, guided by a warrior with centuries or millennia of combat experience, anticipates these moves. It shifts its facing to keep the most dangerous threats in its fire arc. It times its movements to deny the orcs their flanking opportunities. And all the while, it continues that inexorable advance, each step bringing it closer to the orc position. This is when individual orcs begin to break, not in groups, but one at a time. An orc sees his entire mob cut down in seconds. Another watches the Dreadnought walk through terrain that should have slowed it, obstacles that should have provided barriers simply crushed underfoot. And a third fires his last magazine, watches the rounds bounce off harmlessly, and realizes he has nothing left that can hurt this thing. These individuals begin to pull back, not running in blind panic, but retreating towards secondary positions, seeking better cover or more support. The Dreadnought does not pursue individual stragglers. It maintains its advance toward the main orc force, eliminating targets of opportunity, but remaining focused on its primary objective. This single-minded purposefulness is more frightening than any amount of rage or bloodlust would be. The Dreadnought is not angry at the orcs. It does not hate them. It simply needs them dead, and it will continue working toward that goal until they are all dead or it is destroyed. When the Dreadnought finally closes to melee range, the experience becomes truly nightmarish for any orcs who have survived this long. They see the power fist rising, track its descent, and realize in the final second that they cannot dodge or block. The fist comes down, and their world ends in crushing force and disruption fields that tear matter apart at the molecular level. If they are lucky, death is instantaneous. If they are not, they have a moment to realize that they have been reduced to something less than a whole being before shock and blood loss claim them. What makes this experience particularly horrible for orcs is the context in which it occurs. These are not naturally cowardly creatures. They genuinely do not fear death in the abstract. They have charged into fire before, have faced impossible odds before, have seen their mates die around them before. None of this is new. What is new is the absolute certainty that nothing they do matters, that their presence on the battlefield affects nothing, that they might as well be insects for all the difference they make to the outcome. This realization strips away the psychological supports that normally keep orcs fighting. They can no longer tell themselves that one good hit will turn the tide. They can no longer believe that their courage and ferocity matter. They can no longer maintain the fiction that they are mighty warriors facing a worthy foe. Instead, they are revealed as exactly what they are: primitive organisms being eliminated by a superior force that does not even regard them as particularly dangerous. The unflinching advance of the Dreadnought demonstrates several truths that orcs would prefer not to acknowledge. First, that size and strength are not always decisive if they are paired with insufficient armor and firepower. Second, that experience and skill can trump raw aggression and enthusiasm. Third, that some enemies simply cannot be overcome through conventional orc tactics, no matter how many greenskins are committed to the attack. These truths are corrosive to orc psychology because they undermine the fundamental axioms of their culture. If bigger is not always better, if strength does not always win, if fighting is not always the solution, then what is an orc supposed to believe? What principles should guide his actions? How does he understand his place in the universe? The answer, of course, is that he does not understand. The orc mind is not equipped to process these contradictions. Instead, it falls back on the most primitive response available. Flee from the thing that makes no sense and threatens your existence. This is not rational fear of danger, because orcs face danger constantly without fleeing. This is existential terror,
the horror of discovering that your understanding of reality is fundamentally flawed. And the Dreadnought just keeps advancing, patient and inevitable, dealing death with every shot and every swing. A walking reminder that the Orks are not the galaxy's ultimate warriors, no matter how much they believe in their own superiority. Famous encounters. When green met iron. The history of conflict between Orks and Dreadnoughts stretches back thousands of years, encompassing countless battles across the width and breadth of the galaxy. While most individual engagements are forgotten within decades, are lost in the endless churn of warfare that defines the 41st millennium, certain encounters have achieved legendary status, remembered and retold, because they exemplify something essential about the relationship between these two types of warriors. One such engagement occurred during the defense of Baal, the homeworld of the Blood Angels Space Marine chapter, in the year 789 of the 41st millennium. The Ork warboss known as Big Scorcher had assembled a massive invasion force, a green tide numbering in the millions that descended upon Baal, with the intention of conquering the planet and claiming its resources for the Ork Empire. The Blood Angels, supported by several of their successor chapters, mobilized every available warrior to defend their home. Among these defenders stood 41 Dreadnoughts, an unprecedented concentration of these ancient warriors in a single engagement. Leading them was Venerable Astramael, a Furioso-patterned Dreadnought, whose fury and skill had become legendary even among the Blood Angels, a chapter known for its aggressive combat doctrine. The Battle of Iron, as it came to be called, saw Astramael coordinate all 41 Dreadnoughts in a single devastating counterattack that broke the spine of the Ork invasion. The Orks had never seen so many Dreadnoughts deployed at once. The psychological impact was immediate and catastrophic. Individual greenskins who might have stood and fought against one or two of these machines found themselves facing dozens simultaneously, all advancing in a coordinated formation that maximized their firepower and minimized the Orks' ability to concentrate their own attacks. The green tide broke not through defeat in combat, but through psychological collapse, with entire mobs fleeing before the advance of these ancient warriors. Astramael himself became the focus of Ork fury, with Big Scorcher recognizing that this particular war machine was the key to the defensive strategy. The warboss committed his best troops, his heaviest weapons, everything he had to try to bring down this single target. For hours, Astramael fought surrounded by Orks. His Death Company-derived fury channeled through his Dreadnought form to create a whirlwind of destruction that left mountains of greenskin corpses in its wake. When Big Scorcher finally fell, killed by another Blood Angels force that had maneuvered into position while the warboss was focused on Astramael, the remaining Ork force dissolved into chaos. The Battle of Iron became part of Blood Angels tradition, but it also entered Ork culture as a cautionary tale. Survivors of Big Scorcher's warband scattered across the sector, and wherever they went, they told stories of the battle where the metal warriors came in such numbers that the ground itself shook with their tread. These stories spread through the Ork species' oral tradition, becoming a warning about the dangers of attacking certain targets without adequate preparation. A very different encounter occurred during the Ultramarines' defense of the system of Espandor in the late 41st millennium. An Ork invasion fleet had descended upon the system, and the Ultramarines responded with characteristic tactical precision. During the fighting, a venerable Dreadnought named Barkus found his squad pinned by overwhelming Ork numbers, surrounded and facing imminent destruction. Rather than allow his brothers to fall, Barkus made a decision that exemplified the self-sacrifice for which the Ultramarines are known. He ordered the other Ultramarines to retreat while he held the position alone. For 3 hours, Barkus held a critical choke point against an Ork force that numbered in the thousands. His assault cannon never stopped firing. His power fist crushed everything that came close, and his presence alone prevented the Orks from advancing through the strategic junction he controlled. By the time the Orks finally brought enough heavy weapons to bear to damage his chassis, the rest of the Ultramarines' force had safely withdrawn and established new defensive positions,
Barcus died in that engagement. But his sacrifice allowed the Ultramarines to reorganize and eventually repel the invasion. More importantly for our purposes, the Orks who participated in that 3-hour assault never forgot the experience. They had thrown thousands of warriors against a single enemy, lost hundreds of their number, and still failed to dislodge him from his position. The story spread through their ranks, mutating and growing with each retelling, until it became a legend about the metal warrior who could not be moved and would not stop killing. These Orks carried this story with them to future battles. When they encountered Ultramarines again, they looked for the telltale signs of Dreadnoughts in the Imperial force, and when they spotted them, they adjusted their tactics accordingly, us committing more resources and showing more caution than they would against other threats. This is precisely the kind of learned behavior that demonstrates the genuine psychological impact these encounters have on Ork psychology. Perhaps the most famous encounter between an individual Dreadnought and Ork forces involved Bjorn the Fell-Handed himself, during a campaign whose specific details have been lost to time, but whose outcome became part of Space Wolf's legend. According to the accounts that survive, Bjorn was awakened to assist a Space Wolf's force engaged in a running battle with an Ork warband led by a particularly cunning and dangerous warboss. The Orks had been winning through superior numbers and clever tactics, slowly pushing the Space Wolves back despite the Astartes' combat superiority. When Bjorn arrived, the tactical situation changed immediately. His 10,000 years of experience allowed him to recognize patterns in the Ork assault that the younger Space Wolves had missed, to predict where the warboss would commit his reserves, and to position forces to maximum effect. But more than his tactical acumen, it was Bjorn's reputation that turned the battle. The older Orks in the warband had heard stories, passed down through their culture, about an ancient warrior who had fought since the dawn of time and killed more greenskins than any being in the galaxy. When Bjorn's dreadnought form appeared on the battlefield, these Orks recognized him not by name but by description. The Ancient One, covered in honor marks beyond counting, wielding the lightning claw that had slain daemons. The recognition spread through the Ork force like wildfire, and with it came something unprecedented, genuine fear. Not individual Orks breaking and fleeing, but a collective loss of morale that affected the entire warband simultaneously. The Gestalt psychic field that normally strengthened the Orks instead amplified their unease, creating a feedback loop of growing terror. Within minutes, the warband that had been on the verge of victory was instead in full retreat, abandoning equipment and position in their haste to escape. This incident demonstrated something crucial about how reputation affects Ork behavior when facing Dreadnoughts. The specific identity of certain ancient warriors can transcend the general fear inspired by all Dreadnoughts, creating a named terror that affects Ork psychology even before combat begins. Bjorn is perhaps the most famous example, but other legendary Dreadnoughts have achieved similar status in the parts of the galaxy where they have fought repeatedly. These famous encounters serve multiple purposes in both Imperial and Ork society. For the Imperium, they are inspirational tales that demonstrate the valor and sacrifice of their greatest warriors, proof that even in the grim darkness of the far future, there exist heroes worthy of legend. For the Orks, they are cautionary warnings that some enemies are simply beyond their ability to overcome, reminders that for all their strength and ferocity, there are forces in the universe against which they stand no chance. The cumulative effect of these encounters, and thousands of lesser ones like them, is the establishment of a pattern in Ork culture. Dreadnoughts, particularly ancient ones, occupy a special category in the Ork understanding of threats. They are not just another enemy to be fought, but something qualitatively different, something that requires special consideration and preparation. This recognition, grudging and incomplete though it may be, represents perhaps the highest compliment the Ork species can pay to any foe. The admission that these enemies are genuinely dangerous in ways that most others are not. The spiritual dimension. To fully understand why Orks fear certain Dreadnoughts, we must examine the conflict through a lens that transcends simple military analysis and enters the realm of the spiritual and psychic. The Orks, despite their primitive appearance and crude culture, possess a surprisingly sophisticated spiritual framework that governs not just their behavior, but their very existence. And this framework centers on their gods, Gork and Mork, and the Gestalt psychic field that connects all Orks across the galaxy. When Dreadnoughts enter this spiritual equation, they create disturbances that ripple through the fundamental nature of what it means to be an Ork.
Share button, whatever you
Gork
want.
and
Give me
Mork
some feedback
exist in the
if there's
warp
any,
as entities
and,
created
sleep
and
well.
sustained by the collective belief of the Ork species. They are not gods in the traditional sense, not beings that existed independently and created their worshippers, but rather constructs, given form and power by the psychic energy of billions of Orks, all believing in their existence. Yet they are no less real for being belief made manifest. In the warp, where thought and reality blur together, Gork and Mork wield immense power, engaging in eternal combat both with each other and with other warp entities. But the significance of Gork and Mork to Ork psychology cannot be overstated. Every Ork knows, from the moment he emerges from his spore, that these gods exist and that they embody the ideal of Ork warfare. Gork represents brutally cunning approach, the use of direct violence amplified by just enough intelligence to apply it effectively. Mork represents cunningly brutal approach, the use of trickery and tactics that ultimately serve to deliver overwhelming violence to the enemy. These are not contradictory philosophies, but complementary ones, two aspects of the same fundamental Ork nature. When an Ork fights, he does so not just for personal glory or survival, but as an act of worship to Gork and Mork. Every battle is a prayer, every enemy killed an offering, every victory a celebration of the gods' favor. Now, this spiritual dimension gives meaning to Ork existence beyond simple brutality. They are not just violent because violence is their nature, but because violence is their sacred duty, their way of honoring the gods who created them and who watch over them. The Gestalt psychic field that connects all Orks is believed to be a gift from Gork and Mork, or perhaps a manifestation of their presence in the material realm. This field allows Orks to affect reality through collective belief, to make their ramshackle technology function and their crude tactics succeed through sheer faith that they should work. The more Orks gather together, the stronger this field becomes, until massive gatherings of greenskins generate psychic power sufficient to warp reality in noticeable ways. This field also serves as a kind of racial memory and communication network. Orks do not remember specific details from their ancestors because they reproduce through spores rather than sexual reproduction, but they inherit general patterns and instincts through genetic encoding. The Gestalt field amplifies and transmits these patterns, allowing successful tactics and useful warnings to spread through the Ork species faster than genetic inheritance alone would allow. When an Ork encounters a Dreadnought, this entire spiritual and psychic framework is disrupted in ways that are difficult for the greenskin to consciously process, but which create profound unease at a subconscious level. The problem begins with the Dreadnought's ambiguous nature. Is it alive or dead? Machine or warrior? Natural or unnatural? From the Ork perspective, the universe divides into clear categories. Living things have souls that the Ork psychic sense can detect. Machines do not. Warriors fight with passion and fury. Machines operate with cold precision. These categories are absolute in Ork thinking, and they align with the spiritual framework provided by Gork and Mork. A living warrior serves his gods through combat. A machine is simply a tool, useful but not spiritually significant. A Dreadnought violates these categories. There is something alive within the machine, but it is so completely merged with the mechanical systems that the Ork psychic sense cannot clearly distinguish between the organic and the artificial. The Dreadnought fights with the precision of a machine, but pursues goals and makes decisions with the intention of a warrior. It is neither fully one thing nor the other, but something in between, something that does not fit into the binary worldview that Gork and Mork represent. This ambiguity creates a blind spot in the Ork spiritual framework. An Ork facing a dreadnought cannot easily categorize it, cannot easily understand what it is in terms that his faith provides. Is this an abomination, something that should not exist? Is it a miracle, a being that has transcended the normal boundaries between life and death? The Ork does not know, and this not knowing is deeply disturbing because it suggests that perhaps the universe is more complicated than Gork and Mork have prepared him to understand. The situation becomes even more troubling when we consider what dreadnoughts represent spiritually. In Ork belief, warriors who die in battle go to join Gork and Mork in an eternal afterlife of fighting. This is the highest honor, the best possible fate. An Ork who dies fighting knows that his death is not an ending, but a transition to something better, a promotion to the eternal war in the warp, where he can fight forever against ever stronger foes. A space marine interred in a dreadnought has been denied his death. He should have died, his spirit moving on to whatever afterlife the Emperor provides for his warriors. Instead, he has been preserved, trapped in a mechanical body, forced to continue fighting in the material realm, rather than moving on to his spiritual reward. From the Ork perspective, this seems wrong in ways that are hard to articulate. It violates the natural order, the proper cycle of life, death, and spiritual transcendence. Worse, it suggests that some warriors can be so skilled, so valuable, that they are not allowed to die even when they should. This concept is alien to Ork thinking, where death in battle is the ultimate validation of a warrior's worth. To say that a warrior is too important to be allowed his honorable death is to say that duty trumps divine reward, that necessity overcomes spiritual law. For Orks, who see the spiritual and material worlds as continuous rather than separate, this implies a universe more complicated and less just than they want to believe. The Gestalt psychic field that normally strengthens Orks in battle has trouble processing dreadnoughts. The field is attuned to living beings, growing stronger as more Orks gather together and believe in their collective invincibility. But a dreadnought, being neither fully alive nor fully mechanical, does not register correctly to the field. It exists in a kind of spiritual dead zone, where the field cannot quite grasp what it is dealing with. This means that the normal Ork advantage in psychic warfare does not apply when facing dreadnoughts. The Orks' collective belief that they are winning does not make their weapons more effective against these particular enemies. Their shared conviction that they are unstoppable does not provide the usual boost to morale and efficiency. The Gestalt field that normally amplifies Ork strength instead encounters something it cannot affect, and this failure feeds back into Ork psychology as a vague sense that something is wrong, that the universe is not responding as it should. The cumulative effect of these spiritual disturbances is the creation of genuine existential fear in Orks who encounter dreadnoughts. Quote, "This is not the physical fear of injury or death, which Orks barely feel. It is the spiritual fear of facing something that violates the fundamental order of the universe as Gork and Mork have defined it. It is the horror of discovering that your God's teachings do not cover every situation, that there exist things in the universe that fall outside the categories your faith provides. This spiritual dimension helps explain why the fear of dreadnoughts persists even among Orks who have never personally encountered them. The stories spread not just through oral tradition, but through the Gestalt psychic field itself, carried as a kind of warning, encoded into the species' collective unconscious. Young Orks, emerging from their spores, carry within them a vague unease about certain enemies, an instinctive wariness that they cannot fully explain, but which guides their behavior nonetheless. The relationship between Orks and dreadnoughts exists, therefore, not just in the material realm of bullets and armor, but in the spiritual realm of belief and meaning. The terror that these walking tombs inspire reaches beyond simple battlefield effectiveness into the heart of what it means to be an Ork, touching the spiritual framework that gives the greenskins their strength and purpose. And in that touching, in that violation of expected spiritual order, the Dreadnoughts achieve a victory that no amount of firepower alone could accomplish. Conclusion: eternal vigil, eternal terror. We have journeyed through the many dimensions of why Orks, perhaps the most fearless species in the galaxy, must experience genuine terror when facing certain Dreadnoughts. We have examined the psychology of the Greenskins, the nature of these walking tombs, the legendary warriors who pilot them, and the spiritual implications of their existence. Now we must draw these threads together and understand what this relationship between Ork and Dreadnought reveals about the nature of fear itself and the eternal war that defines the 41st millennium. The fear that Dreadnoughts inspire in Orks is unique in the galaxy precisely because it is so unexpected. Orks should not fear anything in the conventional sense. They are genetically engineered for warfare, psychologically conditioned to embrace violence, and spiritually convinced that death in battle is the highest honor. Yet when they face a venerable Dreadnought, particularly one with a legendary reputation like Bjorn the Fell-Handed, they experience something that cannot be called anything other than terror. This terror is not a simple emotion. It is a complex psychological state that emerges from multiple sources simultaneously. There is the physical threat of facing an enemy whose armor cannot be penetrated and whose weapons cannot miss. There is the tactical despair of recognizing that no strategy or tactic will overcome this foe. There is the existential horror of confronting something that violates the Ork understanding of how the universe should work. And there is the spiritual unease of facing an enemy that exists outside the categories provided by Ork faith and tradition. These elements combine to create an experience that fundamentally challenges what it means to be an Ork. But the Greenskin's entire identity is built around being a warrior, fighting with courage and ferocity, seeking ever stronger foes to prove himself against. When a Dreadnought eliminates all meaning from combat, when it reduces the Ork's martial prowess to irrelevance and his courage to pointlessness, it strikes at the core of his being. The persistence of this fear across Ork culture, transmitted through oral tradition and perhaps through the Gestalt psychic field itself, demonstrates that Dreadnoughts have achieved something remarkable. They have created a lasting impression on a species that typically forgets specific enemies within a generation. The stories of ancient warriors who cannot die, who have fought since before time and will fight until after time's end, have become part of the Ork cultural consciousness in ways that few other enemy types have managed. For the Imperium, this represents a valuable strategic asset beyond the tactical capabilities of the Dreadnoughts themselves. The reputation these ancient warriors have earned means that their mere presence on a battlefield can affect Ork behavior, making the Greenskins more cautious, more prone to second-guessing, less confident in their inevitable victory. This psychological warfare component amplifies the already considerable combat effectiveness of Dreadnoughts, making them force multipliers in ways that cannot be measured simply by counting their kills. For the Space Marines themselves, the terror they inspire in Orks serves as validation of the sacrifices made by the warriors interred within the Dreadnought chassis. These ancient heroes gave up their deaths, their rest, and their humanity to continue serving the Emperor. The fact that their continued service has such a profound impact on enemy morale, that their names have become cautionary legends among the Orks, confirms that their sacrifice was not in vain. Yet there is something deeply tragic in this as well. The Dreadnoughts themselves do not see their service as the Orks do. From inside their metal tombs, they experience existence as a combination of brief moments of warfare and long periods of dreamless sleep. They do not know that their names have become terrors to the Orks. They do not understand the psychological impact they have on enemy forces. They simply fight, sleep, fight again, in an endless cycle that will only end when their chassis is finally destroyed beyond repair. And when the terror they inspire is, in a sense, a side effect of their nature rather than a deliberate strategy. They are not trying to frighten the Orks. They are simply prosecuting war with the skills and equipment available to them. The fact that this prosecution creates existential horror in their enemies is almost incidental. This unintentional nature of the terror makes it more profound, because it demonstrates that the fear is a natural response to what dreadnoughts fundamentally are, rather than a reaction to any psychological warfare tactics. Looking forward into the uncertain future of the 41st millennium and beyond, we can expect this relationship between Ork and Dreadnought to continue evolving. As new patterns of dreadnoughts are developed and deployed, yet as ancient warriors like Bjorn continue their service through the millennia, as more battles are fought and more stories are told, the legend will grow. Future Orks will carry within their collective memory an ever-deepening wariness of these particular enemies, a fear that becomes more instinctive with each generation. This creates a fascinating dynamic in the endless war that defines Warhammer 40,000. In a universe of unimaginable horrors, where every species fights for survival against threats that could extinguish them at any moment, the Orks stand out as perhaps the most straightforward in their approach to warfare. They fight because fighting is what they do, what they were created to do, what gives their existence meaning. Yet even they, with all their genetic programming toward fearlessness and aggression, they have found something that makes them hesitate. That something walks on two legs, stands 3 times the height of a man, and carries within its armored shell the consciousness of a warrior who has seen empires rise and fall. It advances with measured steps that echo like thunder, firing weapons that speak with the voice of annihilation, crushing anything foolish enough to stand in its path. It does not hate the Orks it kills, does not celebrate the victories it achieves, does not even acknowledge its enemies as anything more than targets to be eliminated. And in that cold, emotionless efficiency, in that absolute dedication to duty that transcends all human concerns, in that eternal vigil that knows no rest or retirement, the Orks see something that their simple psychology can barely comprehend, but which fills them with a dread they would never call fear, but which any observer would recognize as exactly that. The Dreadnought will continue its march across the battlefields of the 41st millennium and beyond. The Orks will continue to gather in their billions, launching crusades and invasions that threaten entire sectors. And when these two forces meet, when the green tide crashes against the walking tombs of ancient warriors, the outcome is always the same. The Orks learn once again that for all their strength and numbers, there are some enemies against which courage alone is not enough. This is the eternal terror of the Dreadnought, the fear that even the fearless cannot quite overcome. And if you found this exploration of Warhammer 40,000 lore fascinating, if you enjoyed this deep dive into why these ancient warriors inspire such profound psychological responses, even in the galaxy's most warlike species, then please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. There are countless other stories waiting to be told in the grim darkness of the far future, and your support helps bring them to life. Until next time, remember that in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. But within that war, there are legends that echo across the millennia, and terrors that even the fearless cannot quite forget.